to everyone listening and looking online. It's a great pleasure to be able to provide some stimulus and try and meet some of the expectation that Mathieu has set up to shed some light on this essential topic of how we get to deforestation-free global value chains. I would like to share 3 lessons that IDH has gained from spending 15 years working with some of you, many large and small commodity buying or producing companies. I'd also like to share 3 insights that we've developed jointly with ProForest on how the big new regulation coming from the EU on deforestation-free products might go, what the risks and opportunities are there. So 3 lessons from our experience of working on global value chains and 3 insights into the EU deforestation-free regulation. I guess it's fair to say that it hasn't been an entirely happy story for us all working to eliminate deforestation from global value chains. There have been some fantastic efforts and initiatives over the last 2 decades, and the dominant one has been farm-by-farm certification. And whilst this has undoubtedly had all sorts of benefits, particularly for companies understanding their supply chains in greater detail, managing some of those risks, particularly around labor and social issues, it has not been particularly effective at reducing deforestation. And I present the data from WRI Global Forest Watch on deforestation levels over the last 2 decades to give you a sense of how much further we've got to go to get deforestation under control, particularly deforestation of tropical primary forests in the middle latitudes of our world. Again, that's a global picture. There are, and my keynote is by no means a counsel of despair. There are many things we've learned that are positive and can be acted upon immediately, but the overall view is not good in terms of deforestation level. No deforestation, no peat extraction commitments by companies have undoubtedly helped generate demand for deforestation-free supply. And it's probably been most apparent in the palm sector, and it probably has made a contribution to one of the standout successes of the last decade, which has been that Indonesia has got its deforestation under control. It's now been in decline for the last 5 years. And to some extent, they've replicated the success that Brazil had in the Amazon in the early part of this century, in the noughties. Following the catastrophic fires of 2015, government got much stronger at enforcing their forest law, and having a market for deforestation-free supply of palm was undoubtedly a contributor to that. But we have to recognize that most deforestation is happening in the indirect supply chain, meaning often smallholder and often very poor farmer supplying to cooperatives or middlemen who are then supplying to mills or to other intermediaries that then sell on to global goods companies and commodity buyers, which is what makes it particularly difficult to influence deforestation levels from a vertical supply chain, value chain approach alone. It gives us some very powerful levers, but they're rarely sufficient to control deforestation on their own. I won't go into the detail of those different commodities, but they do have some very different dynamics behind them, as I'm sure many of you will know. Nevertheless, there are some more positive things we can say that about creating direct relationships between buyers and suppliers and producers of those commodities. And here I use the term landscapes approaches to define a set of approaches which are about aligning commodity buyer interests with local producer interests and local government ability to regulate or plan or manage land use in the places that are producing these commodities. Sometimes it's called a jurisdictional approach or as well as a landscape approach. And I'll use the 2 terms interchangeably, even though they mean slightly different things. The reasons why taking a horizontal landscapes approach at the same time as a vertical value chain approach gives us greater traction is because we have a decentralized problem. And unlike the transition from unsustainable energy to sustainable energy, where particularly in the electricity sector, we have to influence a handful of electricity utilities in any one country. If you think about your own country and the number of generators of electricity power, it's quite small, whereas the number of people or companies and individuals that generate the produce in our agricultural systems is in the millions in any one, or hundreds of thousands in any one country. So we have to engage a much broader set of actors to influence that transition to sustainable agriculture from degenerative agriculture, as we have in many parts of the world now. And as I said, landscapes approaches we've learned have some ability. It's early days, and we shouldn't claim that this is the only solution or the whole solution by any means. But as you will see from this graph, which was produced by the Earth Innovations Institute, they surveyed 39 places around the world, provinces, largely in Latin America and Asia, some in Africa, and where they had agreements to reduce deforestation between those different stakeholders, they detected a distinct difference and a lowering of deforestation levels in at least half of those provinces. So that's still not slam dunk, it's only half, but it is a source of encouragement that against a reference level of deforestation in surrounding landscapes or jurisdictions, there was a decline in deforestation, which is why it's so significant that late last year, the Consumer Goods Forum announced that it's the members of its Forest Positive Coalition, and Didier, I'm sure, will speak to this in the panel, announced that they would be adopting a landscapes approach that was that will connect some of the largest consumer goods companies in the world with landscapes in those 3 tropical continents, equivalent to the current consumption footprint of those companies. It's early days again, but it's very, very significant, and I think one of the most significant things to come out of the voluntary commitments that happened at Glasgow at COP26. And finally, I would want to say that the third lesson we've taken from working with many of you over the years is that it takes time to build capacity to stop deforestation, because this is about the economics, the politics, and the culture of very diverse regions with very different dynamics. The picture here is of a group of cattle farmers in Mato Grosso, where we've been working for the last 4 years with some of the poorest and smallest farmers in a very big and complex beef supply chain in Brazil. As some of you will know, it's now the largest driver of deforestation, but most of that beef is consumed within Brazil. So it has to be a Brazilian-owned solution if we're to tackle it. We worked with these farmers to develop a tagging system, and using blockchain, we can now trace the indirect beef supply chain as well as the direct supply chain for the biggest meat packers in the world and some of the biggest supermarkets in the world. And working with Marfrig and Carrefour, we now have delivered the first deforestation-free beef, or rather certified and assured deforestation-free beef, to a Carrefour supermarket shelf in Sao Paulo. So there are ways of building that capacity, and there are benefits from day one. We would argue that our experience shows that companies that engage with some of these compacts and agreements at landscape level will immediately feel the benefits, even if it takes time to build the impact and the claims around that impact, because they will secure a better understanding, better relationships with suppliers. And as the current food price inflation and battle for supply hots up, I think you'll recognize that the benefits that might accrue from having those stronger relationships on the ground. And of course, crucially, having local government and farmers agreeing is a great step forward. It gives local regulators a bigger mandate to enforce forest law. It gives some political incentives for better performance, but having international buyers also saying, we would like to source from your region or your landscape is really the cherry on the cake, and the thing that helps those farmers and those decision makers really confirm that there is benefit and mutual benefit from shifting to sustainable agriculture that doesn't involve deforestation. So that's the final lesson I would draw. There are many more things we can say, but I'm trying to keep it to the core learnings that we've gained from the last 15 years. And I'll now try and translate that into some insights around the EU deforestation legislation, because that, of course, there is legislation happening in the UK, in the US, and some rumors that even China are considering setting some minimum standards, but the one we know about is the EU legislation. So I thought I'd give you a quick view of how we see that going and what some of the risks are, as well as the opportunities. I might give you a sort of glass half empty view today. So I'll start by recognizing that it will undoubtedly change traceability and introduce much better levels of traceability, and particularly for some commodities that could be really, really helpful and significant. Well, it'll help with all commodities, but it will be, the European legislation is undoubtedly going to be powerful in the cocoa sector, where Europe is the dominant market. However, in other markets where Europe is a second, third, or even fourth tier player now, compared to Asia, North America, Africa itself, a big growing consumer, then our role is quite distinct. And this diagram helps you understand that the EU approach is currently screening out deforestation from its products. It is not yet necessarily going to reduce deforestation or prevent deforestation. It only prevents products entering the EU market that are connected to deforestation. And so there is a very large risk of spillover effects, where the deforestation-free commodities are sold to other markets with lower or no standards, and that the EU soaks up the market for soy from the US, the market for palm from areas that have been deforested a long time ago in Indonesia and Malaysia, and so on. So that the redirection of deforestation to other markets is a very real risk, because the EU is taking a cleaning approach. We, along with ProForest and a number of other expert organizations, have made suggestions for how the EU regulation could be modified to try and reduce that risk of diversion by taking a horizontal or adding a horizontal approach to its vertical approach, and allowing jurisdictions or landscapes to be regulated, and to allow for improvement in those areas to be recognized by a new category, which we call transition risk. I won't go into the detail, but happy to take questions offline or on later about it. But nevertheless, the principle is that it's not possible to stop deforestation overnight. It takes time to build that capacity. And those jurisdictions or countries that are showing great commitment and have reduced deforestation, or we believe ought to be allowed in and encouraged to play a constructive role in a new regulatory environment, rather than excluded because they didn't stop deforestation by 2020, which is what the current regulation says. So I think traceability, which is what will improve massively through this regulation, has to be combined with a genuine attempt to get to sustainable agriculture, meaning having, and that can't be designed from boardrooms or the headquarters of the European Commission. It has to be done in partnership with local actors, and align local priorities with our international priorities. This map is a map of some of the 20 areas across the world where IDH is currently operating with a landscapes approach. There are other organizations that do that, and we're pulling ours and other organizations' landscapes together onto a new open source platform called SourceUp, which means that you as a company can immediately see which commodities, which places have got which commitments, and where you can back them if you want to, with your own responsible sourcing and preferential sourcing. So this is just our portfolio, but there are probably 80 to 100 landscapes across the world where there are these sorts of approaches taking place. And some of these are very, very large. like the state of Mato Grosso. So to finish and to open up for debate and discussion, I'd say don't despair. It's complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. There are tools and lessons and tools that allow us to, as companies, to immediately use your existing tools, procurement and contracting for these commodities to support the best initiatives. The key is focusing on the places that need the help the most, not to be totally risk averse, and to go on this journey with ourselves and other organizations that are taking the landscapes approach that allows you to combine the best of your supply chain commitments with these wonderful initiatives happening in some of our most precious landscapes across the tropical forest world. Thank you very much.